Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Good morning. This is the Open Door. Jim Hannock speaking. We have an open door because the Spirit has opened the door for us. We want the door to be open to you, our listeners, and to each other, and to the whole wide world, which we are sent to evangelize. This morning, I have two guests, Mr. John Breen, who has been visiting with us on many occasions. John is a student, distance learning student, hangs out in Illinois for the most part, although he's had an escape to Michigan, the heartland itself, but he's returned. And Ed Rushman, who's been a visitor on many occasions as well. Ed, as you know, if you've been with us, is putting together a campaign to represent a key district in Orange County in the United States Congress, and in part he's doing so inspired by the thinking that's come together and sloshed around, and will be moving ahead, thinking of the American Solidarity Party, although Ed is running as an independent. This morning, I'd like to divide our reflections in two parts. And the first part has to do with an idea that is right there in Catholic social thinking, but is less underscored than some of the other ideas, is less emphasized than some of the other ideas, but I think it incorporates those ideas. And the concept I have in mind is the concept of friendship in the political context, which Aquinas himself refers to as civic friendship. Civic friendship. So I'd like to work through that concept with my friends Ed and John. And then later on, what we can do is get an update from the city as it is, Orange County, Anaheim, and the like, to see how some of these ideas that we talk about in a more theoretical way might be brought into play. So I'm going to begin with a question, a very specific question. If there is a relation between friendship and the political order, what is its basis? All very well to read about something called civic friendship. Leads us to think of the civic order, the political order. Suppose there really is, as I've suggested, a relationship between friendship and the political order. How would that work out? What would its basis be? 3, 2, 1. Let's pick on the student first. John, what do you think?
I would say that the link between friendship and the political order, the basis would be the common good, because that's what unites both of them. So if you don't have the common good, there's no common ground for friendship, and therefore the political order to grow from that.
That certainly seems right, doesn't it? Ed, what would you say?
My first thing is always, it's grounded in love. And if the love isn't there, friendships friendships that are not grounded in, I just go for the ideal. If a friendship isn't grounded in selfless love, it becomes mutual use. It becomes more natural, more, I don't know, more animal-like in a way. Not that that's a bad thing, but it's sad when humans that are called to be so much more only behave as animals. It's fine for an animal to be an animal. But for me, it's grounded in love. The desire for the common good, the caring for other people, all of that, if it isn't grounded in love, then I don't think it's grounded in something that's going to end up achieving a good end.
That seems right to me too, but let me ask this question for either of you, and I can try to work on it too. If we love our friends, and apart from love we don't have friendship, can we really love politics?
Well, I mean, for me, politics is instrumental. It's just something that, it's really a name we give to a mechanism that naturally arises when large numbers of people attempt to live together in a productive way. It's a natural thing, especially because we all have different ideas about how things ought to be done. My political science professor said that politics is simply the struggle for power. And I don't really fully accept that. I think that's what it is in the absence of love. I do a lot of politics at work, but not in the sense that we usually mean it. Sometimes at work I work on very, very difficult projects that require a lot of people to work together in peace. And I can tell you that my work is grounded in love. If I didn't love the people, and if I didn't love the people that we're serving, then I would do it differently, I suppose. But when we do these things, there will come a time where one of us realizes something needs to be done a certain way, something needs to change. Sometimes somebody else points it out, and sometimes it's something that I see. And when that happens, my style, which is not always appreciated by the vice presidents and the CEOs of the world, is to go around and essentially campaign for it. I will go out and quietly have hallway conversations and talk to key people and say, this is what we think needs to be done. How does it look to you? And some of them say, oh my goodness, yes, that needs to be done. That's wonderful. And other ones say, if you do that, then this is going to happen and that's not good. And then that's a problem that we have to go work on, and we have to figure out the answer to that. But for me, the bottom line is that politics is not about a struggle for power. It's more how competing ideas can come together in a sense, in an open kind of marketplace, and then let the ideas struggle against each other, but let the people cooperate in coming to a good end. Let ideas fight with each other, don't fight with the people. That's kind of my take on politics, if that makes any sense.
That sounds personalist.
You have the names, Jim, for the things that I only know.
Well, I'd say you have the better of it then. You have the better of it.
The names of the handles we put on the concepts. Without the handles, we can't grab a hold of them.
Well, we can work on it together. Now, John, is what Ed said is that on the mark?
I think it is. And you see classic examples of it, like within workers' unions, where people basically have an agenda, whether it's pushing for more money or trying to get more funding or whatnot. They go around and they talk they have connections within the union. So that's how they get business done, whether it's pay raises or benefits or pensions or whatever you want. So in that sense, then it's politics and friendship working together. Another example, and we see this quite often where I live, where in the police department, certain ranks within the department are permanent, meaning that they're merited, but there are some higher ranks that are political appointments. So the chief of police there, he can put in his friends in those higher ranks. That's because he thinks that these are people who I trust, these are people who I can depend on, therefore they're qualified to assist me in the department in this manner. So that's why he chooses his friends, quote unquote. Even though it doesn't sound very democratic, that's the way it works, essentially.
And there's some tension there, as they say.
Oh yeah, there's tension, and there's always going to be some. Without tension, I don't think a lot of things would exist. If there wasn't some political tension, it wouldn't get people off their rumps to get moving, to get working, to work on something. If there's something you don't like, then you have to get up and you got to do something about it.
Good grief. That suggests that we've got a lot of work. Let me add a couple of things to this question of the relation between friendship and political order. When we look at a classical discussion of friendship, and classical is not synonymous with Christian, but when we look at a classical discussion of friendship, say Aristotle wants to say that if we're going to have friendship, and John pointed this out immediately, if we're going to have friendship, we have to have common goods. And of course we can refer to our common goods as part of the common good. The common good, classically understood, brings within it the particular common goods, that's not too paradoxical, of particular groups and particular orders within society. So if we're going to have friendship, we have to have shared goals, shared common goods. So it would seem if we're going to have civic or political friendship, there have to be these shared goods as well. Now, Aristotle also says, with regard to friendship, we can't sustain a friendship at a great distance. And in discussing that, he says, if you're at a great distance, and this was, of course, pre-email, it was pre-regular postal delivery, if you're at a great distance, you can't really have any contact, any ongoing contact with a friend, so friendships wither. And of course, a common example of that would be all your best friends from high school. What's happened to them, you ask 3 years later. All your best friends from college. What's happened to them, you ask 3 years later. How about your best friends at work? Well, I left that employment 10 years ago. I wonder how they are. The idea is you have to have regular contact with friends if they are to remain friends. Now, when it comes to the political order, well, it would seem here that a good statesman, somebody who is a true political person, had the regard for the political order in mind, would what should we say? Know his constituents, be with his constituents regularly. That would follow, wouldn't it? I think so. And then Aristotle also says this: you can't really have a friendship, and here the classical as opposed to the Christian perspective comes into play. You can't really sustain a friendship with someone who is way, way, way below you or way, way, way above you. Suppose your name is Dives and there's this fellow named Lazarus who's always hanging around at the end of your driveway. Well, Lazarus, being a beggar, is not the sort of person Aristotle could see having a friendship with. And suppose there's this person named Jimmy Carter, president, who says one of his goals is to be the friend of every single American. A whole lot of Americans might say, I suppose, gosh, I don't know how we're going to work that out. You'll never see me in person. I'll only see you on a TV screen. And I have to spend most of my time trying to pay the rent and put bread on the table, and you're visiting this country, that country, the other country. Aren't you using friendship in a way that's rhetorical but not, in fact, real? Any thoughts on the classical requirements for friendship? To wit, shared goods, shared goals, being present among on a regular order, and, well, status. How do those come into play if we talk about political friendship? I know Ed is poised.
Oh, okay. Well, I was kind of looking for the cue there, Jim. That's good.
I have a son who's a professional pool player with his own cue. Go ahead.
So I think, there's so much there, and I could go an hour just on this, and I obviously will not. But in the first place, my background is maybe a little strange. Up until some changes happened in my life, I really never had friendship when I was young. It just worked out that way, and maybe it's because I'm difficult. I don't know. But I went through some stuff where I really reached out to people and made a huge effort in a different way, and I have more of that, but I still don't have it in the same way that I think the classical sense. So being that way, I have learned to cultivate treating people as friends that probably would not classify as friends to Aristotle. It's more that sense that anyone that wants it, anyone with a need, has a claim on me, and I may not give them everything they want, but I'll give them something. It's the idea of going into it that everybody is a friend. There are people that I don't get along with, some that I've cut off relationships with because we were just too far apart, as it says, too far apart ideologically. They had attitudes toward me that were disrespectful, and at some point I just said, I can't do this. But if I saw them by the side of the road with their car broken down, I would absolutely do something to help them. Because they're still my friend, even though we don't have proximity either physically or ideologically. Mm-hmm. And I think within civic friendship, and like I said, I could go long, so I'm going to wind this up real quick. But in civic friendship, I think that you could take each of those criteria and find an analog for them that works at a civic level. In a congressional district, there's 720,000 people. There's no way to meet the classical definition of friendship with all those people. That just isn't going to happen. But one of the things that I think about is if you just take the stuff of the idea that you can't be too far apart in your level, Divas versus Lazarus. In our Constitution, in what we've said in our Declaration of Independence, we've said all of us are created equal. All of us are created equal. All have equal dignity under the law, and the reason we have equal dignity under the law is because the founders believed we had equal dignity before God, which is a very radical thing to say, and we've lost that to a large degree, but we've lost how radical it really was at the time and how it still is. So in a sense, if we are all friends in civic friendship, we are all on an equal footing politically. We're all on an equal footing, or should be. I mean, the reality is that we've made a mess, but we are on an equal footing. So when somebody comes to me and puts a claim on me as a human being or puts a claim on me as a congressman or puts a claim on me as a president, if it's Jimmy Carter, they have an equality. That equality does exist at a civic level because the Constitution says it exists. I hope that makes sense. I'm trying to, it's hard for you know how hard it is for me to scrunch things down to a short time, Jim. What do you think?
No complaints from me, either on what you said or on the time. After all, leisure is the basis of culture, and we have a free hour, so not to worry. But I'll ask John, additions, subtractions there for Ed?
Well, I was thinking about what you mentioned earlier about the classic definition of friendship, and with modern technology improving the way it has over time, I think that definition is being challenged in many ways, especially the meaning of friendship. So we have like the classical definition, but now we can basically put a name. We could use friendship basically as a term to describe an acquaintance. And I'm thinking in particular to Facebook, where you could friend somebody on Facebook even though you never met the person physically in your life. So, it's like almost like a quasi-friendship going on, even though it's called friendship, but it's really more of a quasi-like friendship. And it also goes on to, there's even online dating, online school, things like that. So those are just two almost contradictory things that are going on in my head, as I was listening to you earlier. So, even though technology has basically bridged the gap of proximity, where as opposed to being distant from people, we can almost be on top of it with people far away by means of communication. Does that still fit within the classical context of friendship?
Perhaps your question is the question that a lot of people raise about the limits of something like Facebook and even the counterfeits that Facebook can generate. We all have our stories, and here's a story. Most of my stories these days are about my grown-up children. I have a decidedly grown-up child in his middle 40s who on Facebook, because of a shared interest in the, let's use the word artist, Bon Jovi, did Facebook time with a young woman in Kuala Lumpur for 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7 years. At which point he went to Kuala Lumpur and in very short order, try a month or two, married her. And they now have a family of their own, a great delight. And they're back here in Los Angeles. Now, difficulties. I don't know how many people have ever flown to Malaysia, but if you've flown to Malaysia, you know you've been somewhere. And now she's facing the difficulty of how she can keep in contact with her own family. And rightly concerned about those family ties, for all practical purposes, becoming memories rather than lived realities. So there's a question there, I'm sure, and it's a question that's very much in play right now. Well, let me move to the second item on our agenda, second larger question. And I think maybe Ed signaled his position earlier on this. I'm not sure. The way it reads, and dear listeners, we have a little agenda that we work from. The way it reads goes, is the political order of instrumental value only? Is the political order of instrumental value only? Now, I could imagine someone saying this is going from the abstract to the abstractor, but we can make it clear. Suppose I changed to, is the political order of instrumental value only, to, is friendship of instrumental value only? And now we're talking about, aren't we, friendship in the political order. Why? Because we're talking about what Aquinas refers to as civic friendship. It doesn't come trippingly off the tongue to say that friendship is an instrument, but it might, for many people, be the case that the political order is an instrument. Or is it more than an instrument? All right. 3, 2, 1. Back to Ed.
So when I look at a lot of these things, I really see them as naturally arising. And anything that I see as naturally arising, I will always say that its origins, if they come from the human, their origins would always naturally come from love. If we are created good and go wrong, but if we're created good, then we're created in love, and everything that naturally arises from the good in us is arising from love. I'm not getting that out of a philosophy book, as you may well know.
Good for you. Good for you.
That's just the way it looks to me, and probably I'm going to guess that a lot of people have said that before, and I'm just, it is what it is. But having said that, I think that the politics arises naturally. I think in the smallest village, anytime you have quite possibly if you even have two people, there's a certain politics between them if they're trying to achieve something. And I think the difference between something arising naturally, what makes it instrumental is and I really hate to use this term because it's hip right now, I think, is the intentionality. It's when we take what naturally arises from us and then seek to either perfect it, or, as I would put it, we seek to purify it into its most elemental form. So that in the case of politics, for me, when that naturally arises, then my natural tendency is to say, okay, if this is going to naturally arise, then how do we do it really well? How do we get it into its purest form so it achieves its end in the most economical way and a most effective way? How do we do that? And I'll give you an example of one thing for me that matters a lot in that is to the greatest degree possible to purge self-interest in its most negative form out of what we're doing politically. I mentioned my work, and in my work, when I'm promoting something that needs to be done, it's I don't really have to try this hard for this, but my own career doesn't enter into it because I know that if I want this thing to happen in its best way, that my own career is irrelevant to it. It's not being mean to myself. It's not denying myself something that I really want. It's simply allowing that for this to be done as well as it can be done to achieve its greatest purity and perfection. My own self-interest has to be out of the equation. My talents, my knowledge, my wisdom, all the things that I can bring to it to serve it, those things can be part of it. But my own desire for increased income, my own desire for power, my desire for people to like me, those kind of things would make it impure, and they have to be kept out. So it really comes down for me to have an intention and to take what would arise naturally and then seek actively to make it as perfect and pure as it can be so that it can achieve the end that's for the good of all of us.
There's a certain discipline of asceticism, or turning away from self, that seems then intrinsic to being a statesman, being a statesperson. What would you say, John?
Jim, if I could add one more thing on that?
Yes.
Quick. As a statesman, and you know that I'm not really great at all the philosophical terms because I really don't have a philosophical background, and I love it when I'm around people that do because they can tell me the why and all the beautiful background. But I
could you file an affidavit on that point?
You bet I could.
I don't know who we're going to submit it to, but we'll have it ready.
I might be putting this in. Maybe it depends on how I'm looking at instrumentality and everything. But I look at the statesman as being an instrument, being a willing instrument who all the things like asceticism and the things that you touched on there. The idea is that by purging away those things, even that, the statesman naturally arises. And in denying the self in the right way, they purify that. They have that intentionality to seek to perfect their role in society by getting rid of the self-serving things and all the rest. So it's even expressed there, not just in friendship, not just in the political, but even in the very action of the statesman, is to put aside the things that do not serve the good end that it was made for. So I just want to get that in there, Jim.
That's important. Okay, John, what do you say?
Well, since we're on the philosophy, since that seems to be the subject, the two things that are striking out of me, listening to Mr. Rushman, is social contract and guardians. So politics essentially is the workings of a social contract, meaning that a community of people, which could be any multiple of one, are joined together to form a political body by a social contract, meaning that there is certain rules in the community that they all have to subscribe to in order to survive. And that's what a social contract is. When it comes to safeguarding that social contract or adapting it to suit the times or the needs of the community, that's when we have our politicians, meaning the guardians of the community. So I'm trying to remember which of Plato's dialogues the term guardians came from. I want to say it was the Republic, but Dr. Hennig can correct me. Basically, it's the guardians that are supposed to be the exemplary members of the community that are always on guard, not only just for enemies from the exterior, but also from the interior. And that's that idea, that model has carried over into the works of democracy, which is now in works within the United States, and also many countries as well. So we need the guardians of the peace just in order to not only to preserve the intention, the social contract that unites all of us together, but also to think long term in order to adapt it to suit, not only to suit the times per se, but also because times are always changing. I feel like I didn't communicate that very well, but I hope you guys get the essence of what I was trying to communicate there.
Well, our shared plate here is very full. We still have a whole other question, plus the report from the trenches. But let me at least move things around on the plate that we've been putting together. Ed's talking about the good political leader making himself or herself free, available to serve the political community. And there is a whole kind of literature and reality having to do with something called servant leadership. There's a place called Viterbo University in La Crosse, Wisconsin, that concentrates on servant leadership, and the university has really made connections in La Crosse with the people who lead the city politically and in terms of business, social services, with this idea of servant leadership. And on servant leadership, again, the Jesuits have always had a superior known as the Superior General. The Missionary Brothers of Charity have a superior too, and the superior is called the servant, the servant. And of course, a term for the Holy Father, and there's so many of them, but one of them is the one I like the best, the servant of the servants of the Lord. The servants of the Lord have themselves a servant. Now, I think that language of servanthood is better than instrumental, the term instrument. If we say that somebody is merely an instrument to my goals, then we're really treating that person as less than a person. And there are many people who want to say the political order truly is only an instrument that we use in order to achieve our goals. And those same people would not say friendship is only an instrument that we use to realize our goals on whatever level. I'd like to say that the political order is a good in and of itself, which is to say that it's an intrinsic value. Now, saying that is not to say that it's somehow divorced from human beings, by no means, nor is any claim being made that somehow politics exists in some sort of ideal sphere apart from the human person. Now, one way, and this is truly a sidebar, of getting at this is the way that St. Thomas does. St. Thomas addresses the question of the true status of the political order by, among other things, considering whether there would have been a political order had there been no fall. And there are romantics of various persuasions, say Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who say things like, everywhere man was born free and now lives in chains. The idea being that if we could just go way back to the beginning of the beginning of the beginning, seen from different perspectives, we'd all be free and there wouldn't be any kind of political order at all. But Thomas says, even in a context in which there had been no fall, there would be a need to coordinate our various pursuits of the various basic goods. And that need for coordination would give rise to a political order, and it would be perfectly natural to have that. It's not an artificial thing. It's perfectly natural that we have some sort of way to coordinate our various efforts to realize the good. So from that perspective, I'd like to, one, put in servant when we might be inclined to call ourselves instruments, and then to say that the political order is good in and of itself, and it is wholly natural. Now, seen in that light, it might be very much more attractive to a good many people, because if the political order is a form of service, and it is natural, then it's not something that we can take or leave. Oh, you want to get involved in that? Well, go for it. I'm more interested in music. Or, well, that's okay for some people, whatever floats your boat, but I'm going to concentrate on getting in shape for the next marathon. I don't think we can have that attitude towards the political order. Well, how about that for a rant? The third question is, does true political order depend on solidarity and subsidiarity? Now, we've spoken in the last few weeks about solidarity and subsidiarity. Can we speak about a true political order without incorporating solidarity and subsidiarity? It's interesting. I suggested that we look at a fairly long piece by George Weigel. And in this piece, Weigel says, as Pope, John Paul added a fourth principle to the foundations of the Church's social doctrine, the principle of solidarity, or what we can call the principle of civic friendship. He didn't even want to distinguish between the two. All right, we're getting kind of abstract again, so Ed, save us before it's too late.
Save us from what?
A burgeoning rant.
Yeah. There's a lot there. The quality of our politics is going to reflect the people, and I've said this a lot, from some of my postings from a year ago even. And so if the people themselves wish solidarity, if they see that they have things in common with all of people, and you know how much I love John Donne's Meditation 17. I am a part of all mankind. If all the individuals coming together result in politics, and all of them coming together are people that care about others and see no one as apart from their own good. I often go back to a little bit of Zen and the idea that seeking our good without regard for the good of others is a problem. It's another way of looking at it. If all the people coming together to do politics, if politics arise out of a people that are in solidarity with one another, that genuinely care about one another, then the politics will reflect that, and it will achieve its best promise. If you look at politics as being a good, we don't have to look very far to see that lots of things that we see as being good, food, sex, physical exertion, a lot of things that we have managed to turn into something that is less than it really was meant to be. And certainly we've made a mess of politics, and it's become about everything except the common good. It's really about the individual power or collective power of people, of smallish groups dominating, in some cases, small groups dominating larger groups. Certainly in the United States and in many places, an ethnic minority has been able to dominate a majority under the right circumstances. But that also happens here politically, where you have a relatively small number of people that have a particular set of ideas that manage to turn the whole country in that direction. So, I don't know. I'm not sure if I saved us there, Jim.
Well, let me put us more at peril, if only briefly. You have just now reminded us about the power struggle in politics and inclination to corruption and the like. And earlier, John was telling us about the social contract understanding of the political order. And yes, Plato's discussion of the guardians. And I think the idea was that in a certain sense, we have a social contract, that is to say, we have a constitution, and it needs to be serviced, use the word I prefer, by people who understand what it's about, the guardians. And there are problems there. There's not going to be any place that there aren't problems. Plato famously asked of the guardians, who will watch the guardians? Who will watch the guardians? And he thought that the philosophers should watch the guardians, and that in order to watch the guardians, sad to say, there were necessary lies that had to be told. The philosopher recognizes the need for necessary lies, and I think that there's much to be said for the view that the social contract approach itself is a kind of a necessary lie, unless we see it as open to something going beyond itself. If the social contract is the result of some political struggle, some power struggle, then sometimes the social contract will help us and sometimes it won't help us. It's always up for revision, and it's maybe a necessary lie that we all have to follow the social contract, but we can always ask whether the social contract is any good. And because we can ask that question, it's a question that makes sense, I think there always has to be this openness to the transcendent. And the Christian, of course, believes that the transcendent is the Creator God, and that there is an intelligibility in all of creation, and there can be an intelligibility in the political order, but that intelligibility depends on our recognizing God's working among us. But I don't think you're ever going to get a statement like that coming from anything that has political traction today, which means that we're in a kind of permanent minority as Christians ourselves. Blimey, zounds, rant number 2. We have a grand total of 14 minutes, nay, 13 minutes. I wonder if you want to tell us a little bit about what's happening in Orange County, Ed, and maybe also in California among solidarity-oriented political activists.
Well, within, it's a funny thing is that since I started this campaign, we've actually had a lot more hits on the Orange County ASP site. And somebody recently posted on another political Facebook page that was I'm not sure exactly what their position is, but they claim it's somewhat centrist, had connected me with the Solidarity Party, and that was interesting. But, the hardest...
I'll have to look for that one. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's out there. The thing that's hard about it is, and you kind of touched on it, is it's hard to get people to move. I mean, it's something that's come up more than once on our show. It's hard to get people to move. People are so caught up in the day-to-day of life, the necessities of life, and the non-necessities, watching movies and sports and sitting around, some people play games. There's a lot of things. And it's hard for them, to, with no real education in philosophy or any of these things, they just don't see anything beyond their nose. So they don't see the necessity of improving things. If you ask them, they'll say, oh yeah, it's terrible, Congress is a mess. And they'll respond that way in a poll. But they won't take concrete action. And a lot of my work on this on the campaign has simply been to get people to share things in social media, tell their neighbors, to have conversations. And it's almost impossible to get them to do it. Sometimes I think they're afraid of looking foolish, because they don't want to. Everybody, in friendship, we just want to have a nice, easygoing friendship.
And a lot of the time, the people, maybe this is maybe the reason why I have fewer friends in some ways. If people talk about serious things, a lot of the time they lose friends over that. They say, you know what, they got kind of obsessed with this whole solidarity thing, and that's kind of annoying. And they may not actually say that out loud, but that's kind of where they're going. So people, I think, are afraid to get involved, and they're just not looking at the larger picture. So it's getting anybody to move is really, really hard. That's the hardest thing of all. And if you have lots of money, then you just put out lots of mailers and lots of ads and put posters every place, and they see the name. And if the name looks like a name that is similar to them, then they vote for it. You know, if they see your picture, you look kind of like them, then they vote for you. But it's not really based on decisions. They don't really do the research. They don't really make a commitment to the values that I'm putting out. I'm still getting very, very little attention on the website or on the Facebook. And honestly, it's very, very hard. Everybody's just going along with their lives and not really wanting to get involved, even though they'll be the beneficiaries if we do it right. And if we move away from politicians that are in it for themselves rather than seeking to be servants. That was my attempt to pull it back to the center to where you were at before, Jim.
You sure did. Now, John, what are we going to do?
Well,
No, you got to say that with more enthusiasm.
I'm trying
You
to
could
think
say something
here.
like, crikey, here's what I suggest.
Well, here in Joliet, even with our own local politics, basically whoever makes it into city council are the ones who have the support of the unions, which are it's the working class of people who vote. Unfortunately, they're the only ones who vote. So, say for example, the mayor that we have right now, he was a former police officer, and he left it, because he was too good at being a policeman, and he was getting a bunch of heat for it. He went and became a lawyer instead, and came back and became a city councilor, and then ultimately became mayor. And that was because he had the support of the police union, and so he was pretty well connected. And a lot of the policemen who knew him were still serving, and they could all be part of his campaign. So, I'd like to say, just it would be easy to say that it would just garner the working class vote, and then you're good. But not every town is the same. So it's a messy kettle of fish, one way of putting it. So I'm really kind of at a loss of how a person could garner more votes, unless you're very well connected with a community. If you're familiar with people, prominent families, prominent businessmen in the area and so forth, if you're not that well connected, you'll be fighting an uphill battle in order to get ahead. With that being said, though, it's still worth going for.
I might be repeating myself, but the other day at church, holding a votive candle, I said to an elderly lady, it's always better to light a candle than to curse the darkness. She looked at me and she said, yeah, but there's time to do both.
Oh, my goodness.
That's pretty good.
Well, I don't know if we have too much extra time left over for cursing the darkness. Occasionally, Dorothy Day used to say, you should spend 90% of your time doing constructive things, say the corporal works of mercy, and leave at most 10% of your time for denouncing the powers that be. But use that 10% well. So here and there a denunciation wouldn't help. Now, on a more incrementalist note, I remember Desmond Silvera, our gubernatorial hopeful, saying on the panel that we have to remember that the American Solidarity Party is a tiny party, and it would probably take us a long time to have the name recognition of, say, the Libertarians or the Greens. And that might very well be the case. But after all, if we're coming from a biblical background, we know about leaven and how we're called to be leaven. And I think John's absolutely right. We can't stop doing what we're doing, and we ought to look for ways to do it more effectively. And I think it's a trial balloon, but Ed's effort to do as much as he can by way of social media is certainly in keeping with the times. And one of its side effects is we'll see to what extent the social media can carry the message that we need to carry. There are some media that seem almost incapable of carrying the messages that are most worth hearing. For example, I really don't know of, well, maybe a glimmer here or there of the Christian message being effectively carried by any kind of television. I just don't see it happening at all. Now, maybe we need another century to work on it, I'm not sure. Whereas if you look to art and you look to literature, I think core gospel themes can be found in a wide range of visual arts and in a wide range of literature. So, among other things, we can thank Ed for taking a serious look at what the social media can do. Or are you going to bail on us, Ed? What's the story?
Oh, I'm in it for the run, and I'm at significant personal cost, let me tell you.
All right. I haven't
busy
seen any posts of you climbing any rocks lately. I haven't seen any posts of you going to the circus lately. I haven't seen any of that.
No, I'm completely focused on this. I have a retreat I'm doing next weekend that I'm assisting on, and there's meetings for that, and it's keeping me busy and away from the campaign a little bit, but we'll see what we can do. One of the difficulties that we have is that things are arranged in not just social media, but in everything that's internet. Because I work partly in analytics, not so much right now, but I have, it's, at the very least, there's a bias against certain messages, and those are detected automatically. This is not conspiracy theory. It's an attempt on the part of those that manage these systems to please their user base the most. And their most active base, frankly, is not a base that's conducive to Christianity or to political reform, to real political reform. And so because of that, it's harder to get the message out. I have one of the followers on my Facebook page that put out 900 invitations to my page. Apparently not a single one ever got anywhere. The algorithms, the formulas that exist, determined that those were not interesting things to put out and simply never delivered them.
Mm.
So there you go. And by the way, I noticed you have 2 minutes left.
Well, you just like students always looking at the clock.
Only for your service. I'm only your servant.
I'm teasing. On that very note, I would like to distribute handfuls of wet noodles to all active Solidarity Party so that they could thrash anybody who says what we so often hear, I'm not really comfortable with. I like to tell students that's the first mark of the bourgeoisie. To tell us what you're really comfortable with. You need to come out of your comfort zone. Woof, woof. On that note, I want to thank you, Ed, and I want to thank John, and I want to thank our listeners and those who want to listen at some other time. We have all of these panels available. Simply go to En Route Media, which also has books, En Route Media, and you can look into any of the panel sessions that we've done. God bless us one and all. We look forward to seeing you next week, well, hearing you, and that's pretty good too. Amen. Hallelujah. Come, Lord Jesus.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.